Well, good afternoon, good evening, or good morning, wherever you may be. A warm welcome to our third Digital Ocean Cluster Briefing, also on behalf of Patrick O'Keefe, who is the co-founder of the Digital Ocean Cluster and who will be moderating this briefing together with me. I'm very glad to see that some attendees have joined us for the third time. This means that the network is not only growing, but also consolidating. And I'm even more happy to see that we have an audience with a very diverse background. I see colleagues from academia. We have representatives from international organizations. I see Dorota Los-Siminska from the International Maritime Organization. And we also have Piero Messina from the European Space Agency. And we have also people working in private practice. And it is indeed the very purpose of the Digital Ocean Cluster to connect people with different backgrounds to discuss and explore topics related to the increased digitalization of the world's oceans. Well, in the long run, the idea is to turn the DOC into a network project with in-person events such as workshops, but for the time being and for obvious reasons, we focus on online events. Our main activities are the Digital Ocean Cluster briefings. The format is quite simple. The briefing opens with a 15 minutes presentation or talk with an invited guest. And the following 15 minutes are dedicated to a Q&A session to which all attendees are kindly invited to participate. So you're really encouraged to ask questions or to comment upon aspects raised by our speaker in the second half of the briefing. And you can submit the questions through the chat or just take the floor as you wish. In our first briefing, we were setting the scene by exploring the notion of digitalization of the oceans. And in the second briefing, we dealt with cyber risk in relation to operational technology on board ships. For those who missed the two first briefings, you will find the recordings on our new website, which went online a couple of days ago. Patrick is sending you the link through the chat. And in this context, I would like to thank Nele Tiedemann for her efforts in relation to the website, but also for organizing today's briefing. Thank you for this, Nele. My special thanks go to Anja Blaj, who accepted to be our today's briefing guest. Anja is a lawyer based in Slovenia, and she's a pioneer in the fields of space law and crypto law. I guess what made us to invite her is that she's one of the rather rare experts who really is working at the crossroads of law and technology, or to use her words, exploring the intersection between code and law in a digital society. Well, in order to reserve as much time as possible to the presentation and our discussion, I will only mention some of her many activities which are relevant in this field. Anja is the president of the blockchain think tank Slovenia, and she has notably been co-organizing distributed governance councils to help establish a dialogue between stakeholders within the blockchain environment. Moreover, she's the chief strategy officer of the Future Law Institute. Well, for most of us, blockchain is something that we mainly associate with cryptocurrency and less with the maritime world. However, Anja will offer us some insights into the opportunities that this technology offers for the maritime sector. Anja, thank you very much for dedicating your time to our network. Without further ado, you have the floor.
Thank you so much, Anna. And yeah, thank you for the invitation. It's quite amazing to see this community growing so fast. I've been at one of these events, I think it was almost 1 year ago. And it's fabulous. I mean, exploring the possibilities just where blockchain might actually have its place. It is going beyond cryptocurrencies for sure, although it's a space where even myself, I mean, I've been here exploring this technology for years, more than 5 years already, and still I don't perceive myself as being the expert, and there will never be an event or time and space where I will say, now I know it all. it's just not going to happen. I released myself of that responsibility long ago, and today I'm actually trying to collaborate with as many people around myself so that I can fill in the gaps. So today I hope I will give you a brief introduction to what this technology might be able to do for the maritime activities. I'm going to share the screen because I know we only have 15 minutes and then there's going to be more time for questions and answers. But if you want, post a question in the chat. I'll try to answer it as much as possible. So if we go briefly through what is going to be presented in these 15 minutes, it's going to be the current state of the art, why, for example, blockchain even matters, or why you might be bothered with it, and then the life before blockchain, because we know that this is some sort of a novel innovation that is now entering the space and disrupting all the financial technology, financial sector and whatnot. And then the history of blockchain, which is quite interesting. I mean, even though it only has been around for 10 years, there's plenty of things that have been happening and that one might actually be aware of. Then we have blockchain key features, just for us all to better understand what is it that this brings, what is so much of a breakthrough when we are talking about this technology. And then I collected a couple of use cases. I do believe there's plenty more. And once someone digs in and goes down that rabbit hole, there is plenty of organizations and potentially even the individuals that one might speak to. And then, of course, there's the final contact that you can reach out to if you have more questions even after this event. So the current state of the art. Why it might be important? Well, the first thing that really raised the awareness on the market were the ICOs. The ICO itself stands for the initial coin offering, which is basically very much similar to any other stock. So whenever somebody wants to raise the fund, you usually went to the VC funders or you went for a loan or something like that. But then you also have different fundraising opportunities, and coins were basically one of them. So what was happening was that projects and individuals were offering you coins in exchange for the money. And this was a huge market all of a sudden. It was worth over a few millions, and there were a lot of these projects that were raising big numbers, and some delivered, some didn't. But 2017 was basically the year where a lot of people became very much familiar with the notion of cryptocurrencies, just because there was so much seeding and so much funding going into this space. Altogether, this is something that is maybe worth noticing as well. These are the crypto public addresses. So it's almost as if you have now the insight into someone's bank account. So we know, for example, that Oprah Winfrey is worth $2 billion, let's say, on the market. And here you see one of the addresses for Bitcoin, where somebody is actually worth $5 billion. These numbers are huge, and they are still growing. So it kind of shows how much this market is evaluated. The second or third thing that is also raising quite a lot of eyebrows is that traditional companies such as Facebook, Uber, Visa, eBay, Spotify, and things that are familiar to us are nowadays also looking into how they might be using blockchain technology for their organization and for their management. Everybody has their own idea, but Libra is a project that has been introduced by Facebook in cooperation with all the rest of the companies that you see here. Some of them withdrew, some of other organizations came into this consortium. They had the idea to kind of represent all the users of Facebook with a new coin, which is going to be replacing the traditional currencies that we have. So fiat is all of a sudden having another alternative that can be used on the market, be it for paying any other transactions, let's say a coffee or a pizza, or for distributing the wealth that we are creating on the market. So all in all, the fact that now we have different actors entering this space is also a very strong indicator that this might be the industry that has some underlying value that surpasses just the cryptocurrency. Now, going away from how much is being spent, Tesla was one of the latest investments that was being made into the Bitcoin. It was one of the news that we did not really expect to see in 2021, but it actually followed one of the events where it was suggested that every single company should diversify their own portfolio and invest 5% of their latest revenue into the cryptocurrencies as well. Now, this is something that is being very standardized. It's not something that would be fresh new. It's quite usual for all the companies to diversify their portfolio to minimize the risks. Tesla was basically not really the first one that decided to do so, but it is having quite a lot of eco on the market. Moving away from just the value that these cryptocurrencies and the blockchain presents on the market, where my passion basically lies is the underlying value of this technology. And as it is with every single innovation, the Gartner's hype cycle actually shows you quite well that you usually see first the research and development, and then the rise usually coming with the media, the hype beginning, and then when it peaks, there's almost like a bubble bursting on the market. And this is something that people were telling us in 2017, when we saw a lot of funds going into the ICOs, those being the new coins on the market, and then everybody having this idea, oh, blockchain can now be used for whatnot. People were saying that we can use blockchain for promotion of the SDGs, for the news, for example, for tackling the fake news, for even the maritime activities. We heard it all before, and yet it was basically just a mass media hype. So when it began, it was in 2018 that bubble sort of bursted. And today we see a progression and possibly a second adoption hype, which is going to be probably leading us toward better solutions on the market. So this is yet another possible visualization of what was just explained. In 2017, there was a hype and a bubble and then the burst. And I hope that we made a pause, which is also supported with the idea of having a bear market in the last year. So today we're going to another bull market, meaning that all the prices are again going up. And then all the project managements and all the organizations are getting another influx of money, which allows them to really develop concrete solutions. And this is where we are today. I hope that we are really going to be seeing some new adoption on the market and some solutions that are going to have real background. So like before blockchain, it didn't really just come out of blue. What actually blockchain is being based on is definitely the internet, and what I like to compare it with, because a lot of people still have this question, how does that even work? How are we now having a cryptocurrency that, you know, just sort of comes out of a clean air? The predecessors were basically the internet, and I very much like to compare it to DARPA. So in times of DARPANET, when ARPANET was actually created, so this is the predecessor of today's internet, people had a slightest image of what the internet could be today, but the World Wide Web as we have it today did not yet exist. And this is what is happening with blockchain today. Blockchain is also just another protocol layer, just like the HTTPS is. The HTTPS, we all use that protocol. Whenever you, for example, open up a browser, you usually see the www.com, and then before that, you see the HTTPS. Now, everybody does not really know what the HTTPS stands for, and yet everybody uses it. And pretty much similar thing is going to be happening to the blockchain. It is yet another protocol layer that we use whenever we want to transfer or whenever we want to validate different transactions, different things on the network. And as much as today it is important to know so that we take care of the security and manage the risks, in the future is probably going to be an underlying protocol that is going to be in use, but not a lot of people are really going to have a high knowledge of just how it works. So I know that we only have 15 minutes, but the history of blockchain is quite important because it does come with the premise of financial sector not really operating well. And a lot of people at that time in 2008 and 2009 lost their trust in financial sector. It was actually followed with the Lehman Brothers collapse, so the bank collapse, that the Satoshi Nakamoto, which is a pseudonym for organization or at least one person, published a white paper for Bitcoin. And Bitcoin was basically the first cryptocurrency that entered the market and as such presented this new technology and the new network that is nowadays being described with blockchain. It is not the only cryptocurrency that hit the market. There was a huge development, and for example, another advancement in this sector was Ethereum. Ethereum being very much a similar network as Bitcoin, but it allows other organizations or other individuals to actually create their own tokens on the top of the same network. Along with all the rest of the networks that were basically created, one thing that I like to mention quite often is that Bitcoin was just the beginning. And then a lot of people got this idea that they might also create their own tokens or their own coins. And there was a flood of all these tokens. Not all performed well on the market. So you have some calling them altcoins and then another people calling them shitcoins because they did not perform well on the market. The Ethereum as well as Bitcoin are not flawless. They do have a lot of good features, but it's not as if they don't have bugs or as if they cannot be hacked. We did have a hack for one of the organizations that was the Ethereum DAO in 2016, and it brought the whole community together because what is happening with blockchain in comparison to all the rest of the applications, for example, or whatever technological advancements we have, is that if something goes wrong, it's not as if I can call the support or as if I can call the management and ask them to remove that bug out of the system and to make an amendment and to present me with an update that I will just download on my phone or my computer. It's actually, there is no management. There is no single support. There is no single point of contact. We are now actually dealing with decentralized networks where everybody has a say. So all of a sudden, if there's a bug in the network, we actually have to come together, form a new consensus protocol, and then demand from all the computers to update that code. So when they update the code, they actually update the whole network, and this is how the bugs are now being resolved. So it's a bit of a different governance mechanism that prevails in this technology. Ethereum is, for the difference of blockchain, having a bit of a more concrete community around that can be identified, while, for example, in Bitcoin community, you still don't really know who the actors are. Not to say that they are not pseudonymous, because there's a misconception that whenever we are dealing with blockchain technology, one does not really have the opportunity to identify all the actors. That is a huge misconception. You are always able to kind of merge these different databases and reveal the identity of someone. Now, why I'm having these CryptoKitties in front of us, it's not a joke. It's actually something that is becoming even more so popular this year. These are the first NFTs. Those are being the non-fungible tokens. Why this is so important is because this was the first time that people were really coming across a huge issue, and that is that these networks and solutions cannot be massively adopted. So we all thought that having a decentralized solution on the market and having it open source, now everybody can actually become the participant in this market and create their own solutions. Unfortunately, the CryptoKitties, which were special tokens on the market, showed us that we were wrong. There were way too many people all of a sudden buying in these CryptoKitties and obtaining their own new tokens. And all of a sudden, the network actually collapsed just because there was too many people in the network. So that showed us that we need to create better protocols. And a lot of people started working on the proof of stake and on Casper protocols, which allow this network to actually bring even more people into space and to allow these transactions to still be fast and to still be very transparent when we are operating with them. The DAO is one of the hacks that I previously mentioned, but I'm not really going to go there. This is basically the picture that might be of your interest. Blockchain transformation is really affecting a lot of different industries, and here you can see just some of them. Now, one of the things that I'm usually being asked as a lawyer is whether it really presents a revolution in the legal aspect, just because we are now using smart contracts. Smart contracts are not really the contracts that we are used to operate with. So if you have parties that want to negotiate different terms, and you want to include a new article, for example, in that contract, that's not how the smart contracts in blockchain space work. They are basically just the programs that allow us to execute whatever we have predetermined or whatever we have pre-agreed upon. And this execution is automated because we are now using the code to allow for that execution. The blockchain, however, can really be used for media, law and crime, transportation, governmental services, human rights and contribution, finances, and whatnot. And we really have to understand better what the features of the blockchain actually are that allow us to really use it in so many different segments. So, smart contracts and the way they work, as I just described, are one of the biggest features. The second one is that this is a decentralized technology. Now everybody can actually become the validator, and we no longer really need the intermediaries. This is why blockchain has been so well adopted in the fintech industry. So all of a sudden, it wasn't really that I need a bank to confirm the transaction was happening between me and another person. I can actually use the code and the algorithms to contribute towards that validation. Sometimes this validation is made by miners, or so we call these actors. Sometimes it's really becoming even more so automated. The third biggest contribution of this technology is distribution and it becoming tamper resistant. So the distribution and decentralization coupled allow us to actually create better governance mechanisms. And I think, or this is at least my personal conviction, that the distribution and decentralization allow for a better management of the scarce resources we have on our planet, possibly even the space. So having these three differences, having a centralized, decentralized, and distributed technology, it's not as if one would be saying that distributed or decentralized is better than centralized. This is just as if we would be saying that liquid democracy or horizontal type of a governance is better than hierarchical. It's not really up on us to say that this is better or worse. It's just depending on how we want to be governed and depending on what consensus we need to form in our society, this is what type of a governance structure we're going to be looking for and implementing in our society. So the couple more features are transparency, timestamping, cryptographic signatures, and immutability. Now, these are all seen through the ledger. The thing that I showed you at the beginning, where you could see the public addresses, this is what makes it very much transparent, and the timestampings were actually on the right. I might be sharing this presentation afterwards, so you can see that picture once again. So how can blockchain be used for the maritime activities? This is probably something that you might be most interested in. There's a couple of people that have been investigating this space. This is actually being quite an interesting read. So Moritz and Niels have been looking into how we might be mapping the sea of opportunities using the blockchain in supply chain and logistics. Having blockchain in supply chain and logistics is very useful because what blockchain basically presents is a new ledger, or basically a bit more sophisticated data ledger, data set. So what we are able to do with these data sets or databases is that due to smart contract and due to the consensus protocols that are underlying or the layer one of blockchain technologies, we're now able to say that if we are gathering some sort of data in one database and at the same time at another database, when these conditions are being met, certain activities are going to be taking place. And if we are able to predefine all these conditions ahead of the time before that even happens, then we might be using blockchains, and then we might actually be using better smart chains, smart contracts and supply chains, and implement that solution in the logistics as well. But this is far from being the only solution out there. So after doing a bit of a research, I saw the sea green. I just actually got an email. Sorry, was somebody saying something? No? Okay, I'm just going to be proceeding. Yeah, so a couple of days ago, I actually received an email that I presented with these solutions, Sea Green, which is created for the blue economy, or better said, for the seaweed. So people came to understand that the seaweed can be used in a different manner than it is today. We might be even producing it in such a way that we consume it. But the problem was that you have a lot of these farmers that got unpaid or that even don't have the bank accounts. And the problem is that we don't really have a transparent production. We don't have a supply chain for that. We don't even have the logistics. So the infrastructure is the missing part of the chain. We might be using a better infrastructure to start with. So whenever we are talking about implementing, for example, blockchain solutions, if we are talking about implementing it in Europe, the biggest problem is that we already have the infrastructure in place. It's not as if in Europe we have unbanked people. We have people that have too many bank accounts. I know people that actually have 6 bank accounts, probably using just 3, but definitely the unbanking is not one of the biggest problems Europe has. Therefore, whenever we are thinking about how we're going to be implementing blockchain, we actually have to think about how we're going to be replacing or amending the already existing infrastructure. Where, for example, if we are now talking about the unbanked people, where, for example, we might be using the possibility to really track how farmers are getting the seaweed, how they are then being compensated for whatever they produce, how this is actually being evidenced through the whole supply chain. And then if I was the participant in a specific time and space within that supply chain, I might be contributed or I might be compensated as well. It all starts with just how this infrastructure looks like. And if there is none, then blockchain actually has a huge advancement here. Another thing that I also came across was the IBM solution, which is not as new as the last one we spoke. And it was basically about the reducing the ocean pollution. It went very much similar way as the previous solution for the seaweed. People actually had the idea of collecting all the plastic around the ocean and at the sea, the beaches and everywhere. And the problem was that all these people gathering the plastic, again, did not really had the bank accounts. So having the blockchain in space and opening this conversation helps us really figure out what is it that we need to contribute towards, or what it is that we need to compensate people for. So if somebody actually provides us with work and really gathers all the plastic that is being spread across the oceans and provides us with that work, it shouldn't really be the volunteer work. Everybody should actually be compensated if they have been contributing their time and energy towards such a solution. Now, if we are able to really make a strong evidence that this was happening, and if we need the validators in the supply chain for that to actually exist, and if we want to contribute or compensate these people in some way, it might make sense not to really compensate them in fiat currencies, so in normal currency, but to actually create a token and then grow their reputation or allow them to really have a vote, for example, in the organization that altogether is being based on the blockchain technology. And then last but not least, sorry, this picture is a bit pixels. A long time ago, I actually came across the Ocean Protocol and the people behind it. And I must say that this is not really strongly connected to how we might be progressing with the maritime activities, but it's more or less just a protocol layer for all the data that we might be able to send across the network that we are using. So one of the things that a lot of people had these conversations around was that we might suddenly be able to obtain data from the satellites, and then this presents a condition. So whenever we obtain a specific data from the satellite, this kind of supports or acts as a trigger for triggering the data and to activate the data from another database. If that is happening, and if we are able to actually create sort of consensus protocols around these actions and around these triggers, then what needs to happen is that somebody needs to take care of these databases being strongly connected between themselves and for that data to be protected on a higher level. So this is where the Ocean Protocol actually comes very handy, even though it's not really an organization or a corporation that exists or has a very strong connection to just the maritime activities per se. And this is where I'm going to be concluding my presentation. There's plenty more use cases, and I'm more than willing to actually explore them with you together. Please do contact me or give me a call if you have any more questions. And I do hope that I will be able to answer a couple of your questions if there's any.
Anja, thank you very much for your presentation and also sharing your experience working in this field. I find it very fascinating to see what kind of development is going on up there. But saving time for the audience, I have plenty of questions, but I would like to hand over to the audience and ask around, is there any question to Anja right now? Please raise your hand or your voice, you have the floor. Alrighty, I will take the time meanwhile also to, okay, I pose my first question then. Actually, this is also the experience we had working together, Anja, in the past, also in the space sector, is that people from different fields, say, let's say technology and law, often do not really speak the same language. However, given the increased digitalizations of the oceans, and this is why we are here, it is important for lawyers to understand these technologies, and also for those development technologies to understand the law. So does that mean that that there is work to be done in bringing all these actors together? And from your personal experience, how could be that done, and how does this influence your daily work?
Right. So, yeah, absolutely. I mean, it still happens that a lawyer would ask whether a smart contract means, for example, that lawyers will no longer be needed, or that code is now being used instead of the law itself. To some extent, that might be the case. And I would highly suggest Primavera's book. There's Primavera, De Filippi and Aaron Wright. They wrote a book, Blockchain and Law. And they kind of described how the rule of law might become the rule of code. But nevertheless, I mean, it's funny still to hear that lawyers still think the smart contracts are indeed the contracts, or when you hear developers talking about smart contracts, not really knowing that they might be using a very similar language to what the lawyers usually do. And this is why we have created distributed councils in the first place. We had way too many people talking together, but not really using the right or the same language. So we first had the need to be addressed, and that is to create the bridges between these people, to allow them to actually address similar topic, but from different angles. And of course, it's always useful to have these interdisciplinary dialogues and to cross-pollinate all the knowledge that people are having. And one of the things that we are observing, possibly not even just in the legal industry, is that we know more and more about less and less. So we are being nichely specialized within different segments, but it comes with a cost that now we are no longer actually able to have the overview of a broader picture. So it becomes increasingly important that we learn how to speak to each other and to learn how to cooperate. And of course, there's plenty of events just like this one, for sure, to enable people to really share their expertise and knowledge, and to allow everybody to ask questions and not feel kind of, to establish a, I don't know, maybe a space where you allow for stupid questions as well, because it should be all the time. Like, there's no stupid questions. Just ask as much as possible so that we come across with the right answers and find the solutions.
Thank you very much. Actually, I wanted to ask you another question, but taking, for example, the note from Pierre right now, who's unfortunately leaving us already, but his suggestion at the moment, how we should think about that Europe is taking the lead in those technologies. I mean, you had those conversations, I guess, also with our colleagues abroad, on West and East side in Asia, but also in America. What is your impression how Europe could put in a position and taking the lead in this technology and the implementation? Would maybe the maritime sector be one of the leading key factors here?
It could be. I'm not that familiar with maritime industry. What I'm seeing, however, is that Europe is actually taking a very strong stance on crypto assets. So it does come along with the regulation, which influences heavily the further development. So, for example, MiCA regulation, that is the regulation for crypto assets that is introduced by the European regulators, is nowadays actually introducing the idea that whomever is going to be issuing the tokens to the market, or whomever is going to have the need to implement blockchain technology in their operational or within their organization, is going to be meeting heavy barriers from the regulators. That being said, I'm not sure if the European market is really inviting all these actors to really use the tokens. However, I must note that the MiCA regulation has actually started and is continuing to exist mainly because of the Libra coin. So we know that Facebook nowadays is thinking about having their own token, their own coin. And as this presents the alternative to a digital euro or to the rest of the fiat currencies, of course, nation states are kind of putting the barriers on that because they want to protect their own sovereignty. Nevertheless, I do believe that technology does have a lot in common with Europe, because a lot of people have been migrating, for example, from San Francisco and from Silicon Valley to Europe. Berlin was one of the Silicon Valleys, for example, of Europe the times of the ICOs in 2017, you had a lot of developers, a lot of mathematicians, a lot of philosophers, and even social developers coming into Berlin and talking about these solutions and then even implementing them. So there's Tezos, there's the DAO, there's Ethereum Foundation, although this is actually being based in Switzerland, but you have even Ocean Protocol itself based in Berlin. In Slovenia, for example, we saw a lot of these types of developments as well. We saw not only early adopters who have invested into cryptocurrencies, but also a lot of ICO developers that were putting these solutions on the market and then hoping that they will be adopted over time. So yeah, I do believe that Europe is almost like a creator or is going to be taking the lead in this. Partially, I kind of have a feeling that it comes along with us being so democratic. So how, for example, the governance of European Union works is that we want to satisfy the interest of every single state. So every time we want to come about with new regulation, we invite all these stakeholders. It's not as if the US does not go this way or China doesn't go this way either. But in Europe, it really is seen that we are trying to satisfy that need for high level of democracy. And this is being resembled in technology as well. We are not fighting a battle. So it's not as if whomever is developing decentralized and distributed ledger technology is now fighting a battle towards a country. It really isn't the case. It can work hand in hand. It's just that we need to figure out what type of an interoperability between these types of consensus protocols we're going to be using. And of course, technology always kind of resembles the value systems of its creators. So it's no wonder that there's a lot of these people working now on technology in Europe.
Also, thank you very much for that answer. And especially the last part, I really would like to highlight here more kind of the vision for the future, where the strengths of the European Union lie. Looking at the time, I would still like to take the question from Christian. Hi, Christian. I would just read it out loud. It's my understanding that carriers, agents, and cargo owners are eager to reduce costs, and the electronic bill of landings might be the future. However, it seems like blockchain is challenging concepts as document of title, delivery, etc., due to its document of title status. Would you say a general problem between legal concepts and blockchain exists?
Oh yeah, there's definitely a challenge between existing legal concepts and the blockchain philosophy, if you want to call it. And the one that I see that prevails is that a lot of legal concepts nowadays are actually based on the notion of the nation state. So whenever we are thinking about how the law functions, we rely on the nation state to actually take care of it, while the blockchain surpasses all the borders and goes way beyond the notion of a nation state. Quite often, what blockchain really presents is an unregulated space which creates its own norms, just because every time we deal with a society, we are actually creating norms as well. But some people might be comparing it to the lex mercatoria, which you might actually be very well familiar with. So in centuries ago, what would happen is that the ports, for example, and the merchants introduced their own rule sets because they needed them to operate with one another. However, these rules at that time weren't really considered and weren't really recognized by the monarchs, nor were they enacted or put into the constitution or elaborated further on with any types of contracts. They were simply rules that existed on the economical level. And what is happening right now is perhaps that the lex mercatoria is being translated into the digital domain as well. Now, when we are talking about whether blockchain is now challenging concepts such as document of title and delivery, I do believe that to some extent the blockchain verifications and validations, not only of transactions, but of whatever is happening in the network, can be very much summarized or presented with the analogy of what the notary offices do. So whenever we have the document of title, or whenever somebody actually verifies my identity, it verifies it based on the elements that they are taking into account. Now, if that is done by a human being, so be it, but then we are actually risking that there's going to be a human error in the process. While if we are actually putting that in the hands of the AI or in the hands of the code, then we are sort of digitalizing the whole thing. It's not as if we are now replacing the document of title with something that is no longer a document of title. We're basically just digitalizing the whole thing. in terms of delivery, I'm not really sure how to see the connection there, but whenever we are talking about blockchain being implemented, for example, in frightening industry or in the cargo industry, in the logistics, what we might be thinking of is that with the digital twin that we are creating for every document that we have to sign or every evidence that we have to provide to someone else to actually trigger the transaction or to trigger sort of actions on the other side, we are now able to not only digitalize the whole thing, but to connect it on another layer. On another level. So for example, if I have participated and my verification have been consistently proving to be the valid one, I might be rewarded for such actions. I might actually become a more important actor or a more important member of this whole organization that we have created with being the members of the same supply chain. And this is where the beauty lies. This is why quite often the cargo industry is no longer just looking into how we might be creating a digital twin, but how we might be actually compensating people for providing us with so much information that enabled the digital twin in the first place. Delivery, in terms of delivery of the cargo against the bill of like, I do believe that whenever someone actually provides this evidence, if the evidence is provided in a digital form, then this might be, again, useful for blockchain development as well. But not only for triggering the transaction and to kind of replace the lack of trust between these actors, but also to really bring it to another level. So to allow for different compensation schemes that kind of lead towards a better redistribution of the wealth that is being created. So we are moving from having a capitalism in place and only compensating one company or one individual for whatever work they have created, or for whatever company is now getting all the invoices across. We are redistributing that wealth and creating a space for social capitalism.
Well, thank you very much, Anja, for these interesting insights. I guess you really managed to connect law and technology, and blockchain is a technology which doesn't know border, and in that sense it's quite similar to the oceans, which are also borderless space. And I'm really happy that you shared insights with us. I would also like to thank the audience for joining us. We will host the next briefing in April, and you will hear from us in due course. Well, if that were an in-person event, we would now all have coffee together, or at this time of the day, maybe a drink. The online format doesn't really allow for doing so, but nevertheless, we will stay online for an additional 15 minutes for those who have time to have a coffee or a drink together and just to have an informal chat. The last two briefings we just cut off after the formal part, and some participants wish that we would also open up a space for more exchange. And of course, that's also the purpose of the network. So for those who have time, please stay online. For those who need to go home, or maybe you're in the home office or have other meetings or work, I wish to thank you again for joining. Take care and stay healthy. Thank you very much.